Okay,
Yes.
so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the part of the world from where you are joining us today. And welcome to this October IEL online forum. My name is María José López Couso. I'm professor of English linguistics at the University of Santiago de Compostela and also IEL vice president for research. And I will be moderating the forum today, which is entitled, as you may have seen, From the Core to the Periphery, the Value of the Marginal Aspects of a Language. So before we start, a couple of housekeeping items, housekeeping issues. First of all, I want to announce that the session is being recorded. It's going to be recorded all through, except for the last part of the session, the Q&A time at the end, so we'll stop the recording there. And as to the format of the session, I will give a very brief introduction as convener of the session. Then we will proceed to the individual presentations, but by each of our three invited speakers, and to a discussion between them on the topic of the forum. And then after the end of the recording, we move to the open discussion and the question and answers time with the people attending the forum. The participation from all people will be both live and also through the chat, okay, so through the Zoom chat. So first of all, let me introduce our panel of experts today. I'm sure they don't need any introduction. You know the three of them very well. We are going to have as one of our, well, the first speaker today, Brian Joseph, who's a distinguished university professor emeritus of linguistics, and the Kenneth Naylor Professor of South Slavic Languages and Linguistics at the Ohio State University in the United States. We also have Günther Kaltenböck, Professor of English Linguistics at the University of Graz in Austria. And the third, we have my colleague and friend Belén Méndez-Naya, Professor of English Linguistics at the University of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. So I believe that from what you will hear from them in the rest of the session, I'm sure that it will become perfectly clear to all of you why they are, I would say, the perfect trio, okay, in a forum devoted to marginal and peripheral aspects of language. So as it was included in the ad, in the announcement of the forum, we will discuss key issues such as why are peripheral linguistic phenomena worth investigating? What do they tell us about the way in which linguistically central material is learned by speakers? Also, what kinds of data are most useful for the study of peripheral aspects of language, for marginal aspects of language, and also the relevance of these marginal phenomena for language variation and for language change, okay? So the idea of devoting one of our IEL online forums to marginal and peripheral linguistic phenomena came to me when I was rereading Brian Joseph's 1997 paper. The title is On the Linguistics, let me check, I don't want to give it wrong, On the Linguistics of the Marginality, the Centrality of the Periphery. And specifically, I focused on one specific paragraph, which I particularly like. And I quote here from Brian. I claim here that despite the fact that it has long been recognized that some aspects of language are quite central to the system, while others are more marginal or peripheral, and despite the fact that the core has always attracted more intense attention among linguists than the periphery has, nonetheless, there is much of value in considering the margins and the peripheral aspects of language. So this is the paragraph, the specific paragraph from Brian's work, which gave me the idea of devoting this specific online forum to this marginalia or something like that. And I have myself devoted some time to this marginal low frequency phenomena in English, and I myself have come to enjoy the beauties, okay, let's say enjoy the value of these peripheral aspects of language. And also I have learned about let's say, their potential, their enormous potential for linguistic debate and for linguistic analysis. And I'm sure that many of the people attending this forum today would be able to compile a kind of catalog, a long catalog, probably very heterogeneous, okay, of many different kinds of linguistic marginalia, linguistic phenomena, which can be related to linguistic marginality in some way or another, okay? Items, constructions, sounds, which are marginal in terms of their frequency, their function, their semantics, okay, the way in which speakers use them, and so on. But the problem is that quite frequently many of these peripheral facts in a language are considered to be simply a list, okay, a group of exceptional behaviors, and I'm using Brian's words again. And as a consequence, linguists have tended to concentrate on the core rather than on the margins. But today we will be moving from the core to the periphery and give this linguistic marginalia the prominent place, the more prominent place that I believe they deserve in linguistic analysis. So after this brief introduction, let's proceed now to the individual presentations by each of our three guest speakers. And I'll give the floor to Brian. So Brian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for reading my paper. You know, you write these things, and lo and behold, 30 or so years later, someone actually pays attention to it. So that's very heartening. Let me just make sure I need to. There we go. Okay, let me start with a comment about linguists, rather than linguistics or language. I think it's fair to say that linguists love to generalize. We believe that, and there's good evidence for it, that language is rule governed in certain respects. We believe that language is systematic in nature, and that shows up then in our desire to generalize when we can. And in fact, this is part of our training as linguists. It's part of the way we train our students. It's even the beginning linguistics classes, we ask them and try to encourage them to see what generalizations can be made about linguistic data. So and this is obviously the right way to go in a certain sense, because there's a lot about language that is rule governed, a lot of rule-like behavior. There are regularities that we draw attention to in our classes, in our papers, on our research, and that we really draw some comfort from when we see them. And there are mechanisms in language that specifically extend generalizations and spread regular patterns. I'm thinking of what we call analogy in language change, for instance, is really an extension of generalizations to new material. But at the same time, as Maria Jose has pointed out, there are elements in language that do not lend themselves well to generalizing and are somewhat irregular and highly particular. And this is where marginalia come in to play. So what do we mean by marginalia? Well, they are well, wait a minute. Here we go. They're items that are characterized by one or more of the following traits. They have low frequency. They are irregular in a certain sense. They're potentially isolated within a system or a subsystem. And sometimes they're just one-off kinds of things and that exist in the language but are not part of any general system or subsystem at all. So in this way, they offer little or no basis for generalizing beyond the occurrence of the marginal item itself. Moreover, they show that they show a high degree of particularity. That is, they have traits that must be specifically learned and specially learned and are not really derivable from other properties. For example, there are some linguists who have analyzed ago in English, as in 2 years ago, as a postposition and not as an adverb, due to its consistent post-nominal positioning. So we say 2 years ago, not ago 2 years, or 2 ago years, or anything of that sort. If this is the right analysis, and I'm not necessarily going to try to defend it, but it has been proposed. If it is the right analysis, then it would be the only postposition within English, and thus grammatically marginal within English, given the prevalence of prepositions, preposing of these elements instead. And this fact about ago doesn't really follow from anything about it. With regard to the prepositions like in, at, on, and for, and with, and so forth, we could say that their positioning follows from the general prepositional character of English adpositions and the head initial syntax that they participate in. Now, with regard to the degree of particularity that must be learned, let's consider the situation with the definite article, or really the lack of the definite article in some ways, in phrases in English that consist of a preposition plus an institutional noun, especially American English, but we'll see that British English is relevant too, in a certain way. So in American English, we say to the hospital with a definite article, in the hospital with a definite article, even if it's not a specific hospital, but just some hospital or other. In British English, the article is missing, and you hear to a hospital or in hospital. But there's a further complication in American English in that it shows a British-like article-less locution for educational institutions as the object of a preposition, as in I go to school. If you say go to the school, that's a particular school, but I go to school is a general sense with no article. I am in school, and the same is true with college as an object. So there's a lexical idiosyncrasy here, a particularity that must be specially learned, even with the modest generalization that we might say exists over a school and college as educational institutions. We see this kind of lexical particularity, something that must be specially learned, also in contact situations. An example is the Turkish postposition karşı, meaning opposite, that was borrowed into Aromanian, a Balkan Romance language, and the Greek of Adrianople, now Edirne, during the Ottoman period. Interestingly, it was borrowed as a postposition, that is, in the same way that it is positioned in Turkish, despite the largely prepositional character of Aromanian and Greek. So this borrowing stands out as something marginal in these languages. And the same is also true for the Turkish postposition gibi, meaning like in this variety of Greek. Other Turkish postpositions are borrowed as prepositions, which is what we would expect given the overall prepositional system in Aromanian and Greek. Now, these instances of borrowing show that in second language acquisition, the L2 learners, that is the Aromanian speakers and the Greek speakers who were learning and to use Turkish and bringing Turkish into their language as well, they must pay attention to lexical particularities, to irregularities and details that need to be learned specially, that don't follow from anything in the borrowing language. So what can we learn from this? I would suggest that we can apply this model of learning lexical particularities and of learning how marginalia are embedded within a language to first language acquisition as well, and to the learning of our first language, our native languages. That is to say, maybe all language learning, that is the learning of the first language as well as learning of a second language, involves learning particularities about specific lexical items. And what we believe are rules and generalizations, we as linguists believe are rules and generalizations, are really ex post facto summations over a set of these learned particularities. That is, the generalizations are subsequent to the learning of the language data in a piecemeal manner, an item by item manner. So let me close by noting that this view is consistent with highly lexicalist theories of grammar, such as head-driven phrase structure grammar, HPSG, and with the recognition that the lexicon is finite, even if very large, but as a finite entity, it's therefore learnable in an item by item manner without the need for generalizations. The generalizations in this view come after the learning of the individual items, if such generalizations come at all. And that's it. That's my piece. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, first for accepting our invitation to share with us your insights on linguistic marginalia, and specifically in this, in the sense that how we can learn, or what we can learn from this marginal phenomena about how this linguistically central material can be learned by speakers. So there will be time afterwards for discussion and questions and comments from all of us. So I now give the floor to Gunther.
Thank you. Just sharing. If you give me a second. Can you see it now?
Yep.
So thanks a lot. So I'm taking my cue very much from Brian's paper, and I've picked a number of marginal constructions that I've looked at over the years, and I'm trying to highlight how they can perhaps say something more general about marginal constructions. And I'm starting with the Erkleft with zero subject relativizer. What on earth is that, you may wonder? It's something like there's a man getting into the bar. This has received very little attention in the literature, and when it is mentioned, it's usually described as non-standard, or very often, as you can see from the quotes here. But when you look at the actual data, as I did in the BNC, spoken BNC from 1994 and 2014, you can see, yes, they are not very frequent, but they are clearly attested. And if you look at the most frequent one of them all, the there apostrophe S pattern, ignoring now the various possible subtypes, you see a frequency of 14.9 instances per million words. So that's not a lot, but still, you know, it's clearly attested, I would say. So even though it's a low frequency structure, and it's attested in the text type informal, everyday spontaneous interactions. So it has a moderate degree of marketers. I don't think we can call it non-standard. There's also an interesting mismatch between perceived and actual language use that was mentioned already, noted by Lambrecht. And he says that these structures were uttered spontaneously by university professors, all of whom were convinced that the construction did not exist in the dialect of speech. So what do we conclude from this? You know, marginal, the label marginal may depend to some extent on the type of database that we have. Most corpora do not actually sufficiently reflect colloquial everyday conversation. If you think of COCA spoken, this is TV, radio, interviews and talks, and nothing else pretty much. And also we mustn't forget that introspective evaluation may differ from actual language use. Of course, this is where corpora can help, but corpora themselves may also be rather limited, certainly with spoken language. Two further constructions. First one is clause final so. So where the so discourse marker occurs at the end of the clause, as in this example.
And my son goes to school, so here, you know, in the summer, and I teach, so.
And this use, if we look at the frequencies in Koha, as you can see, not very frequent at all, single digits, but there's a clear increase in the 21st century. And this is confirmed by the COCA, where we note a significant rise. And the interesting thing for me is that this use comes also with new discourse functions. So on the interpersonal level, it's used to initiate a turn change. On the text organization level, it marks retrospective relevance. So the unit of talk it is attached to at the end is linked to the preceding unit of talk. Another marginal construction is what I call the last I checked fragment, as in this country, last I checked was a free country, or last I heard there are 50 states in the United States of America. So the form, I think, is relatively clear. Last plus first person pronoun plus a verb with evidential meaning. Looking at the frequencies, again, we can see not terribly frequent, but we note a clear development here, a clear increase in Koha, and that's continued in Koka. The more interesting thing perhaps is if we look at the development in more detail, we notice that this fragment, elif fragment called here, is first seems to be modeled on the full structure of a specification sentence. The last thing I knew was, so that's the blue bars in the diagram, and later that shifts to a different model, that of the temporal adjunct, something like last time I checked or when last I checked. So we can notice here an interesting shift in allegiance, you could say, from the fragment first being modeled on a specificational template, if you will, to then later on being modeled on a temporal adjunct template. So what can we infer from this then? Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. So marginal structures may be indicators of incipient and ongoing language change. So we can perhaps detect the development of new functions, or it may give us insight into certain mechanisms at work. Here's another marginal construction, insubordinate if clauses, as in if you'll just come next door. So this is a subordinate clause which occurs by itself. So without a main clause, it acts like a main clause itself. And if we look at the frequencies in the ICGB corpus, the international or the British component of the International Corpus of English, then we can see not very frequent, but an interesting range of different functions. It can be used as a directive if you take that mirror, or as an optative expressing a wish or hope, if only Dennis Betts could have picked that ball up, or exclamative if you think it was a whole generation doing that, and others. So what can we conclude from this? Marginal structures may not just be structural anomalies, but they may fulfill very specific functions. So there may be a functional reason for the omission, in this case, of the main clause. So it's a case of less is more. We have less structure, something is omitted, but more function, different functions. My final point is really sort of refers to the fact that many grammars refer to these or subsume these structures under the label of something like irregular sentences, non-sentences, and similar. This is where you would find insubordination, also semi-insubordination, such as funny, you should say that. Possibly also interjections, vocatives, formulae of social exchange. I've also listed here discourse markers, comment clauses, disjuncts, although admittedly they're not so infrequent. But these and related constructions are often seen, and I'm referring here to Brian's paper, and Maria Jose also mentioned it, they're often listed as exceptional behavior. However, if we compare them and look at them in more detail, they may turn out not to be so exceptional after all. These, for instance, all of these share certain characteristics. They're all syntactically independent. They are typically set off prosodically from the rest of the utterance. They have non-restrictive meaning. They tend to be positionally mobile, and they may be, as most of these are, elliptical. And this is what has prompted us to propose that instead of listing them as exceptions, as a random list of exceptions, that we can see them perhaps as representing a grammatical component, grammatical domain in its own right, which we call thetical grammar, which is different from ordinary sentence grammar, but on a par with it, and it interacts with it. And we also assume that theticals are created by the process of cooptation, by lifting something out of sentence grammar. So the point being then, by comparing different marginal structures, this may allow us to find certain commonalities. This may be a basis for wider generalization, for instance, noting theticals or cooptation. So it may allow us to see the wood for the trees. And I'm ending with a very speculative point, saying something about the potential role of these constructions in the language system. If we see grammar or the language system as a complex adaptive system, as some people have, then it needs two components. It needs to be a conventionalized system which has sufficient stability to allow for communication. And this is where sentence grammar may play an important role. But at the same time, it also needs to be an adaptive activity, which has sufficient flexibility to adapt to the communicative needs of the environment. And this is where perhaps thetical grammar and also many marginal constructions may play an important role. And I'm ending on a sort of another sort of final analogy for what it's worth. We can, think perhaps of central constructions as the tectonic plates that don't change so much. They're relatively stable. And in the periphery of these plates, we find the fault lines. This is where we can perhaps locate the marginal constructions. This is where all the friction happens and the innovation also occurs. And in any case, to rephrase slightly with the title of my talk, I think marginal matters. Thanks. That's my little contribution.
Okay, thank you so much, Gunther, for this presentation. A perfect example, I would say, of what I mentioned at the beginning, that you may quite easily compile a list of a catalog of apparently unrelated constructions and elements, linguistic elements, which are considered to be marginal, but in a way, they are not so marginal in a sense, okay? And we can discuss this issue of what is synchronically marginal, which may be later on across time become not so marginal, more central, okay? This is something that we can discuss in the, during the discussion time. Okay, so time to hear what Belén Méndez-Naya has to tell us about the topic, the specific topic she has selected for discussion today, sharing with us her views about marginal elements. Belén, the floor is yours.
Yes. So let me see. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
So, okay, thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much, Maria Jose, for the invitation. I'm really happy to share this forum with Brian and with Gunther. And I think that after their presentations, it's very clear that marginalia or peripheral aspects of language or low frequency aspects of language have an intrinsic value and that they deserve a rigorous study. And I think that, peripheral low-frequency linguistic features can also shed light on core phenomena. So, and especially, they can help us understand how language changes. And for someone working on grammaticalization like me, the study of low-frequency phenomena can be an evidence for emerging changes and for grammaticalization pathways which would otherwise remain hidden. So today, I would like to present a low-frequency phenomenon, which is, of course, Maria Jose, well known to you, because this reflects some of the work we have been doing for some years now, and it is on minor declarative complementizers. Let me see if okay, so what are these minor declarative complementizers from the adverbial domain? I will be dealing here very quickly on the deployment of adverbial clause links to introduce finite complement clauses in examples such as the one you can see on the screen. So here we have conditional if, but it is not in a conditional clause, or the comparative conditional markers as if, as though, and like. In something different from, the positions we normally associate with them, or the temporal marker when, or the negative purpose marker lest, or the exception marker but. As you can see, they appear in these sentences which differ from what we normally think about when we think about their adverbial use. And also similarly, if we go to the history of English, we can find similar examples in, for instance, though, or the concessive marker though, or with till, the temporal marker till. And well, these kind of complementizer uses of adverbial subordinators have, been overlooked in the literature. We have paid some attention to them. And more recently, Marisa Brooks has dealt with like, and Noelia Castro-Chow has discussed till and the use of till in complementation structures. Okay, now one of the features of adverbial subordinators, as stated by Ben Corbin in his monograph 1997, is that adverbial subordinators are syntactically polyfunctional elements, and they tend to take on new functions either within the adverbial domain. Think, for instance, of since, which starts as a temporal, but it is also used as a causal, but also beyond the adverbial domain. And he describes also some continua, and he says that adverbial links are placed in the meeting of point of several category continua and in close linkage. And he mentions specifically the continuum, complementizer, adverbial subordinator, and relativizer. So adverbial links, as we shall see, they have, of course, their co-function in the adverbial domain, but they also have this marginal function in the complementation domain. So let's go back to the examples. And one of the things we can see in these examples in bold type is that they fulfill a number of criteria that make them come closer to what we understand as a complement clause. So for instance, they are obligatory constituents in clause structure. They cannot be omitted without affecting the acceptability or the kind of grammatical or semantic acceptability of the sequence. And as complements that they have to appear with a particular predicate, And this is what we can see here. So for instance, when if is used in complementation structures, it requires the presence of what Michael Noonan called a commentative predicate, which is a predicate giving like a comment or an evaluation on the part of the speaker. When we have as if, as though, like, they require the presence of a propositional attitude predicate, and more specifically, they occur with verbs of seeming and appearing. When occurs with commentative predicates like, love, or hate, lest with predicates of fearing, but occurs with inherently negative propositional attitude predicates like not doubt or not deny. Though is also found with commentative predicates, especially with verbs meaning wonder, and until appears very frequently. I mean, till is not very frequent, but it appears with some frequency with the verb long. Now, if we compare the adverbial, the core function of these elements with the peripheral function as complementizers, well, we shall see, that, that we can consider them to be complementizers, these elements, because they cannot be replaced by adverbial subordinators of their same semantic domain. So for instance, you cannot replace if and substitute it, and replace it by in case. It doesn't go. Or you cannot replace lest with another purpose marker, like so that not. That doesn't go. So they are a bit different, but the clauses that are introduced by these, what we call minor declarative links, can be replaced by clear and unambiguous and core complement clauses, like, for instance, the clause here, the to clause, or the that clause that follows here with fear. So that would be indications that the clauses introduced by if, though, like, lest, etc., they are indeed complements. And in fact, another piece of evidence for their complement status comes from coordination, because they can be coordinated with unambiguous complement clauses. This happens, for instance, with this till clause, the one till the shadows fly away and that day breaks on them. So we have a till clause coordinated with a that clause, or here in 10, an as if clause coordinated with a that clause. So that would help, that would indicate that they are sort of fulfilling the same function. Now, if we take a look at history and see when the complex and I have been working on, and as you can see, they have a long history, some of them. Some of them go back to the Old English period. On some occasions, we can see that both the adverbial use and the complementation use is attested from the very beginning. That is the case with if. But on other occasions, what we can see is that there is a gap between the adverbial use and the complementizer use. And in any case, this just shows some data. We can see that the other linking functions these adverbial subordinators may show, specifically this complementizer function, is relatively low frequency in comparison with their core function, their peripheral function. Now, peripheral facts, like the ones I have just described, are much more, and again, I take Brian's quote, a list of exceptional behaviors. And because indeed, there is pattern in the periphery. Now, what we have seen in connection with these minor declarative complementizers from the adverbial domain is that they tend to be associated with predicates expressing an attitude on the part of speaker or experiencer toward the preposition, that they are typically associated with non-assertive matrices. And what we believe is that they are indeed some sort of epistemic markers. So when these connectives are used in their original adverbial domain, they have an epistemic meaning. And when they are transferred to the complementation domain, they can only occur in constructions which already possess some epistemic coloring. So in a way, we can say that these adverbial links harmonize with the epistemic nature of the complementation structures in which they appear. Now, when we have also, in our view, these minor declarative complementizers show or are examples of secondary grammaticalization, understood as a grammaticalization of already grammatical items. Why is this so? What can we see here? On the one hand, we can see examples of, they are examples of bleaching. They lose some of their original implications of condition, concession, purpose, etc., which explains why they cannot be replaced by other adverbial links expressing the same semantic notion. Second, there are two cases, one is but and the other one is lest, in which the negative meaning is lost. So they come to be used as that. However, as I mentioned before, there is also persistence, another of characteristics of grammaticalization, because they need to be inserted in a harmonic context, harmonic with their original adverbial meaning. These structures I've just been describing also show grammaticalization at the level of clause structure. So we get from hypotaxis to embedding to subordination. And what I find maybe most interesting is that they show typological generality, because similar, even though low frequency and marginal examples can be attested in Latin, in Romance languages, in many Germanic languages, in Caucasian languages, in Austronesian languages, in Australian languages, which shows, and to quote Josephs again, that there are cross-linguistic parallels at the margins. So maybe we should be paying a bit more attention to marginalia. Okay, and I think this is all I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Belén. Thanks for this brief and concentrated presentation of our dear so-called minor declarative complementizers, to which we have devoted quite a lot of time over the last few years. So time for comments, questions,